welcome to
The Get Together.
It's our show about the nuts and bolts, the meat and potatoes, the nitty-gritty of community building. I'm your host, Bailey Richardson. I'm one of 3 founding partners at People & Company.
I'm Kevin Huynh, another founding partner at People & Company. I do a lot of our one-on-one coaching with community leaders, including our interviewee today.
Oh, yeah.
Oh.
We'll get to that in a second. Each episode of this podcast, Kevin and I interview people who have built communities about just how they did it. How did they get the first people to show up? How did they grow to thousands more members? Today, we're talking to Carly Ayres. If you're on the internet or if you're working in design today, you may have heard of Carly. She's full of personality, energy, and has a pretty alluring, rebellious vibe. Her designs are not the polished, precious, minimalist stuff we may have become accustomed to. Carly's work is interactive, it's dynamic, and it's sincere. If you want proof, you can visit her website, carlyayres.com. It is a Google Doc, and it's rad. Almost 5 years ago now, Carly started a community on Slack that she called, and still calls, Hundreds Under 100, a play on the Forbes 30 Under 30 list and other similar awards. The Slack group brings together a vetted set of designers.
One of my favorite stories is this high schooler reached out to me via Twitter. He lived in somewhere in the middle of the country, but didn't really have much of like a creative community, and he didn't really have like any sort of like creative mentors, and he had found me on Twitter, and he's like, I'm trying to apply to like Cooper Union, and I'm wondering if you could look at my portfolio. And I was like, actually, why don't I just throw you in this space with like the chief creative officer of like Dropbox, and watching this dude share his portfolio and then like meet all these people and have them give feedback in like this really lovely, gentle way. And that was like one of like the coolest things, to like take someone, put them in that space, and just know that with all the energy and everyone else who has like all this experience to offer, and be able to like help them out and give some feedback.
These folks joined forces, sharing resources, insights, feedback, and emotional support. So we wanted to talk to Carly about this special Slack group she started, because we get questions about these, what we call community watering holes, digital watering holes, all the time.
I'm thirsty.
I know. People ask us about this all the time. They want to know what platform to use to bring their people together and what they can do to actually make it engaging. Carly's figured this out. She's figured out how to make a digital community work.
Yep.
And Kevin, full disclosure, is in the Hundos, as they call themselves.
Yeah, one of the very inactive lurking members.
A lurking
I come back and forth.
Yeah. And you were also Carly's boss at one point at Creative Mornings. Worked with her. So full disclosure. But Kev,
Helped hire her.
Yeah, there we go.
Yeah.
Strong hire.
Thanks, Kevin.
Strong hire. Kev, what stands out to you about Carly in this group, and why were we so stoked to interview her?
Apart from just liking Carly.
Indeed. Hear.
I'll come from a personal angle. It's just, I'm like a social media dad. And online communities isn't my strong suit.
Don't worry, I got you, brother. I got you.
Yeah, there it is.
When 2 become 1.
Yeah. The in-person stuff is more what I'm used to. I have trouble, sometimes really keeping up with Slack and online discussions. So the idea of like a thriving digital community isn't something that I have personally had a hand in realizing, and it's not something I totally get. I get it, I'm in there, and I've definitely gotten value from looking at jobs, posting jobs, finding freelancers and such, but the experience of building one of these is something I was just so curious to learn a little bit more about. And some of the fears are the same. We were talking before that one of those big fears is just no one's going to show up. Or a little bit from now, it's just going to be you hanging out in the watering hole all by yourself. Hey, anybody want to click on a link?
And
it's the fear when you host a party or a meetup or get together is no one's going to show up.
No one's going to show up. No one's going to be there. We've had it happen.
We've had that happen. Ask us sometime. So yeah, just digging into what it takes to build digital community, from the code of conduct, those nuts and bolts, as well as kind of that emotional experience of building a digital community.
Yep, absolutely. Brad, all right, let's get into it. The first question I want to ask you is, how did this idea enter your brain? What was going on in your life at the time when you decided to start Hundreds Under 100?
Yeah. Hundreds Under 100 started out of a few different things. I mean, you mentioned that I used to work with the wonderful Kevin Huynh.
Ooh, me.
At Creative Mornings. So I'd come fresh out of that job working. And if you're not familiar with Creative Mornings, it's basically, I think you've described it as TEDx without the X, or just the X.
Just the X. Wow, I'm amazing. We have a listener over here.
I always describe it as TED Talks, but like for the creative community, like very like guerrilla style people meeting up for the morning for breakfast. But I'd kind of come off of that. I'd met a ton of incredibly awesome people through that. I just jumped without much of a plan into freelancing after a tumultuous job that didn't end up working out. And then all of a sudden I had an inbox full of both opportunities and then like people looking for jobs or looking for to be connected to various opportunities, and just like a huge network of people that I wanted to somehow figure out how to connect. At the same time, I had this Google chat that was growing substantially in size. I was working at Google's Creative Lab at the time.
What's a Google chat?
Yeah, I'm like,
a Google Hangout, I suppose.
Okay.
On brand. We'll keep it on brand.
Okay.
I had a Google
that
Hangout.
thing in your Gmail that sometimes pops up.
That's what I was imagining. I was like, you can put a bunch of people in there?
Yeah, you can put
I just got a spam one.
There.
I just got like, I was on 33 and then it was like some racy stuff was getting posted
Wow.
in my Gchat. And I was like, whoa.
Eject. Yeah, and it was the rules of that chat were like, I would post links and you weren't allowed to say anything.
Oh.
Which, if anyone knows me, then...
Which is the definition of community.
That's community, folks. There you have it. But yeah, it was kind of like a combination of those things and like people wanting to share and like wanting to create like a better, more robust space for that. And Slack was like the super cool new enterprise software at the time.
Yeah, what year was this?
Oh, gosh. This was 2016. No.
Okay.
This was like 2014.
Wow.
I graduated in 2013. I worked at Creative Mornings for like a year. Mm-hmm. It's probably 2014, 2015.
Yeah. It's interesting. I keep seeing how there's this pairing of a new platform and people choosing to spend time on it, like excited to spend time on it, and communities that form around there. A lot of the best things I think that started on Instagram are the most human things were like at the beginning where like people choose to use it. And I feel like at Slack now I'm like, oh, I don't know if I would necessarily join a new group on it. But at the time in the beginning, it was like perfect timing. Maybe.
It's almost like the tool is like a provocation to start a community. It's like, whoa, this is a thing where people can interact. You know, it's like, whoa, who would I bring? Whoa.
And then so like one of the first channels was like Link Pack. It was like the same as this name as this like hangout chat group. And we're like, oh, Link Pack, that's where the links go. You're not allowed to say anything. There's one called Aesthetics where you can only post images. Yeah. And I mean, it started with, there was jobs, there was intros. Intros was born out of just, I think even like icebreakers we used to have at Creative Mornings, which was the name tag you would wear and I would have a specific provocation and you would come in and share it. And intros was like a space where you're like, oh, I know how to do this. Like, I have something I can bring into this space. Like, I have something I can share. Like, my name's Carly, and I'm from Florida. It's the weirdest state in the country, hands down. But yeah, like having like that space and like knowing what you should be bringing into it.
So just like to drill in on it, why Slack? I'm curious. Yeah.
I think for the ability to have a somewhat closed space, to have it not be like an entire free-for-all. I think I'd seen things like designer news, or I'd seen things like Reddit where the barrier to entry is non-existent. Maybe you have to like make an account, but maybe you don't even need to have a photo. You don't need to have your name, but having some level of control over how people were able to enter the space and how they're able to represent themselves within that space, as well as just a linear dialogue structure. Like some of the constraints of that platform and features of that platform made it good for that.
Yeah, I saw you said something in an interview that was like, when I first started this group, you were freelancing, and you're like, I don't really want to tweet out like advice about a contract I'm drafting up for a client. So there's something about maybe the privacy of it.
Yeah, and there's definitely an intimacy and like a level of trust there. I mean, you have like a list of members, you know who's there, you know who's engaging, you know who's like looking at the stuff that you're saying. But yeah, a lot of freelancers, they have questions about clients, their clients follow them online and they're wondering like, who do I ask? Like, who is my community of peers who like are going through this at the same time? And especially with freelancing, I feel like when I took that jump, it was like so many people have been freelancers, so many people freelance, but there didn't really feel like there was a space where those conversations were happening. And I think that's partially the nature of the work. Freelancers tend to be one man or woman islands that exist across the sea, but at the same time, like, yeah, you're coming into a space, maybe you're there for a week, maybe you're working with a team for like a day or two, and then you kind of disappear back to from whence you came.
I remember this group stands out in my mind because the name is so memorable. Hundreds under 100 is just the best most brilliant name. I don't know that I've like come across a community with a more interesting, better name.
Wow.
Yeah. I don't know. I could be wrong.
Website,
Gold
but I would
medal.
also like that on my resume, please.
It's just
That's
cathartic to hear. Like, it's not super snarky, but it's like, oh, thank God someone said that. How did you get that name? And like, do you think that had something to do with like so many people wanting to join, or did people join just because of you?
I really think it strikes a chord. At the time, similar to coming off this plunging into the world of freelance. And then I had applied, I think for, it must have been like the third time for either like Forbes 30 under 30 and ABC Young Guns. And I'm like putting it on my portfolio, like sending that stuff out.
For those things?
If you have a publicist, it's helpful.
I had received like yet another rejection. But I think it recognizes such an isolated, such a privilege, such a specific group of people in general. And most times, it's like, do you have a publicist? Do you know the person to talk to? And coming from a place of privilege myself, like I do. I know those people and I'm like throwing my hat into the ring. But also there's so many more super talented, wonderful, caring designers and developers and creative individuals who don't make the lineup for those types of awards or who don't get invited into those spaces. And there wasn't really a space that felt like was recognizing that. And
so how did you
create that space?
Did you create that name? How did that come to you?
Yeah, the name came pretty quickly. I mean, when you say like when you're talking about how did I know to use Slack, I remember like sitting in front of the like set up your like Slack space interface, and I was like, hundreds under 100. I struggled a little bit with whether it should have been 100 under 100, which in retrospect I realized that's how the other ones work. I stuck an S in it, and that's really it messes me up every time.
But if you said hundreds under 100, that means it's like it can be
hundreds of people under 100 years of age.
Exactly, it could be ever expanded. If you only did
that
100,
was the idea.
then it'll be like
then we would have to only choose 100 people, and we have more than that. Part of the sign up, you have to say that you're under 100.
Consent. Wow, so it's ageist.
It is in that regard.
Ageist.
It is. You got to cut it off somewhere.
One thing that strikes me hanging out in Hundos sometimes, I'm like one of those lurkers that pops in every 3 weeks. I look at something. But when I do, I'm sort of impressed by it. It feels like so many people have contributed to it. They're like, whether it's like the resources doc or the types of channels, or I'm curious, like, what are some things that Hundos have changed or contributed that Carly or the admin's picking, what to do? Like, what kind of came up from the community?
A lesson learned very early on was to relinquish a lot of that control that I had, that I tend to like to have in a lot of aspects of my life. And that was a space where very quickly was like, oh, this is scaling very quickly. There's so many different sub-channels and sub-conversations taking place, and I can't possibly be a part of all of them. Bringing on moderators, as well as being able to give people the permission almost to like run with it and like make that space their own. And it started a bit with a code of conduct, I would say, where we forked that from another community that someone else was a part of that was also a Google Doc, and made that our own. It created a whole structure of this underlying infrastructure of Google Docs. And different conversations would come up time and time again, especially in like the freelance channel or the jobs channel. And people would keep having to like refer upward to like old questions and answers. And finally, to old threads. And finally, they just like ended up putting them in a Google Doc. And so there's Google Docs for specific freelance advice, for New York-based advice, for local printers, and for where to get pins made, and what sticker company are fascists, and all the information you need as to be a real contributing creative person. There's Jin runs a group that goes to the Met, the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and they do drawing like once a month. There's like freelancer sub meetups, and they come and meet up in person. We have like a quarterly event series that started where people give talks. So there's this whole like online version where people around the world are able to engage more through that, but as well as in-person meetups that are happening.
I'm always curious about like, okay, party of one, Carly. How did you get the first 50 people, 100 people into it? Like, who are those people? Did you have a few people that were kind of key allies in creating the thing? Did you just fire off an email? Like, tell me about how you just got the first other people to show up in there.
In the beginning, it definitely started with a few people who I knew very well, perhaps like collaborators, people I was working with at the Creative Lab, other freelancers who I had the conversation with. And I was like, I'm thinking about like moving these conversations like into a different space. Like we keep talking about it, like I think you would really be interested. And then very intentionally reaching out to other people and telling them, hey, I think you would have a lot to contribute. Like we're creating this space, it's just getting started, but these are the types of questions and answers that come up. Like you reach out to me a lot for like X, Y, and Z. I think you'd really like get a lot out of it. But then like waiting, letting those people get to know each other before bringing new people in. I think of a lot of other Slack groups I've joined where all of a sudden you're in there and there's like hundreds of thousands of people. And I knew just like if you all of a sudden just like bring a bunch of people into a space and they don't necessarily all know each other, that also leads to just kind of like a lot of people pulling out or being like silent and not really knowing how to engage, who they should talk to. Similar if you drop like one person into a space where like 5 people know each other, they think everyone knows each other and they feel very uncomfortable. So there was some intentionality to kind of like bringing a few people in, getting the space going, starting a few channels, figuring out the needs, and then iterating from there.
So Kev also was telling me that you guys have a nomination process now.
Yes.
Yeah, when did that show up? So if you want to join the group, someone has to nominate you and then you're kind of approved? Or like, why did you guys start doing that and what is that?
Yeah, that was necessary. I think very early on, there was like a kind of like a come to Jesus moment where all of a sudden there was a point where I had added these people. I'd been very intentional about like choosing the people I thought should be in there and kind of like trying to like cultivate like a specific type of space that I thought would help keep me from having to answer so many emails, but led to a lot more emails. And all of a sudden I did a survey of the space and I had like sent this survey out to everyone. And the feedback that I received anonymously was like, this group is like mostly white women. And for me, that was a moment where I was like a self-realization of like, oh wait, like that's because I'm a white woman and a lot of my friends are white women. And this space has become to really reflect me and like my personal experiences and backgrounds and relationships. And if it's going to actually serve more people, then I have to really let go of the reins and invite other people in and give them the control to start choosing what they want for that space and start bringing in other people that reflect different backgrounds. So the nomination process was a bit of like holding my hands behind my back too and kind of like giving up that to the group, as well as like bringing on moderators who reflected the needs and interests of the other people who are in that space. And now it's still a pretty loosey-goosey nomination process, but it allows, there's like an open channel where people can nominate others and other people might reach out to me via like Twitter DM or email and I'll like drop them in there. And it also allows for like anyone who's in the space already to like reach out to an admin and be like, hey, like Susie and I got in a huge fight last summer and like it would be really weird if she was in this space, or like I've heard that person perhaps like had this issue in like another group, or it allows for like some level of vetting from everyone in the space, as well as then the moderators on a semi-monthly basis. It's not particularly regular, but we have like a Google Doc as well where we go in and we like rank new members based on conversations that we feel like aren't happening or like experiences that we're looking for, different perspectives that don't currently exist in the space.
So you kind of assess them in a batch, basically.
We do. And then and then we invite them in batches.
How do you invite someone?
It's usually they've expressed interest in some capacity, so they likely have some awareness of the group. We ask anyone nominating to share the code of conduct with the nominee prior to, and then I have...
Let them know what they're getting into.
Well, let them know a little bit. Set some expectations. Expectations are a great, wonderful thing. And
tell me why. Why are expectations a great, wonderful thing?
Because later, when things don't go the way you expected, or perhaps deviate away from expectations in some way, then you're able to point back to the agreed upon code of conduct and point to the line items that were not followed, perhaps, and then it gives you at least like some baseline of a conversation to be like, okay, hey, this is why that's not appropriate.
Yeah.
Don't do it ever again, or please leave the space.
I know these are private, so I don't want to blow anyone's cover, but can you explain what some of the things are that are often issues, or like, what were some of the first things that happened that made you feel like I have to create a code of conduct?
There are conversations that aren't dissimilar to ones you would hear perhaps at work or among friends, but a lot of those, sometimes it's banter that either goes too far, maybe someone's talking about someone who's not in the space. It's like a very simple, obvious one, but we ask that people don't do that for obvious reasons, kind of just like reminding people that it is a professional space where people are looking for jobs, opportunities. There's people in there from all different companies, and to be aware of that. Sometimes maybe... it is a group of predominantly designers, so whenever a company gets rebranded, someone comes in there guns blazing with like their super spicy take, and you'll be like, the lead designer for that redesign is also in this group. Like, please just let's take this down to like a 5, please. And those are like the very like PG rated. We definitely have a no tolerance policy when it comes to any racism, homophobia, sexism. Like the list goes on. And so with things like that, that's only come up like once or twice, but it's pretty much, I have a thing that I send people that's like, hey, just a heads up, you've been removed from this group for like this reason. If you want to talk about it, like I'm here, I'll get coffee with you. But unfortunately, like it breaks our code of conduct and you can't be in this space anymore. And I've only had to do that probably twice.
Yeah. And so I saw like one of the rules is that you can only offer feedback if it's asked for. Is that right?
Yeah,
that's
a good one.
Yeah, how did you come to that?
One.
Is that like similar, this idea of the rebrands and all of that? Or like how do you navigate like people talking about their discipline without like asked for criticism or like that energy of critique? It's hard to balance.
And I think people are very quick to offer feedback, especially in that space. And I think it gets back to like certain demographics are certainly quicker to offer up feedback than others. And I should note, we have private channels for women and non-binary identifying people, as well as people of color and LGBTQ communities.
Yeah.
And so a lot of the time conversations will start in one of those sub-channels, and I'll be in there and I'll see it and I'll be like, oh, like this is a larger problem. Like we see like these things happening in general channels and we see this behavior, and then people feel more comfortable sharing that maybe in like a private DM or in a private channel. And so when it's like a repeat behavior, like, all right, maybe don't give feedback unless people want it. And so that led to like a critique channel where people actually share work that they want feedback on. And I think oftentimes help job people will be like, I'm looking for a job. Like, here's my portfolio. And people will be like, the lettering on the logo. We need to like change the kerning. I'm not a type person. I'm sorry. But yeah, and those things kind of arise. And so that came out of like repeat incidents. We also have a vent channel that erases every 24 hours.
A what?
A vent channel where people go and like dump...
Say whatever they need to say.
Whatever they need to say.
Because
a lot of that stuff
venting.
like...
Yes, sorry. I missed the N.
Hashtag VENT.
I was like veterinary? I was like, what's going on in there? That sounds great.
It's photos of interesting vents. So
okay.
Storm drain type.
Kevin's going to slide in there later and post some vent pictures.
Racing every 24 hours. And like, yeah, that came from people would just go into like general or any banter channel and just be like, oh, like I hate when the coffee machine is not working or my venti latte is cold. And you're like, well, let's put that in a channel because you don't actually
put you in the corner.
Yeah, you don't actually want anyone to respond to you.
Yeah.
And actually, I think the purpose of that channel is like to get that stuff off your chest, followed by, please do not offer feedback or advice. Because a lot of people would come in there and be like, oh, like I'm so frustrated. Like I applied to all these jobs, nothing's working out. And someone's like, oh, well, I took a look at your portfolio and it sucks. Those are exaggerated examples, but
I want to loop back just quickly to something. I mean, kudos around sort of the self-awareness and the reflection of the community on how the community might diversify.
Yeah.
And, communities are often like bonding spaces, right? Like we come there to bond over a certain thing or a certain part of identity or a certain interest, occupation. But oftentimes, especially when communities start with just people you can bond over unforeseen factors like, oh, well, we actually all look like this, or we come from the same place or area, or we live in this same, and when you go back to your community's purpose around, supporting designers and also the freelance aspect, supporting people through like navigating an independent creative career and life, like you realize like, oh, there are some areas here we don't necessarily need to bond over.
Yeah.
Like we can diversify, and we should, if we really want to have that impact and realize that purpose for as many people as possible.
Totally.
We should be proactive about how we continue to bring in more folks and make this a safe space for more folks who would resonate with that purpose. And send me in the cake whenever you need.
Yeah, and I think that's something intentional. It's something that, I mean, you and I talked previously. I went in for a little Kev community coaching session.
Coach Kevin.
Yeah, I think the thing that came up was to continue in that mission. The next step is likely like me being removed as like the head of that community entirely, which is something that I see in the foreseeable future.
Yeah, passing the torch.
Should anyone want it?
Should anyone want it?
Kevin, another thing you mentioned to me about this community that I think is interesting is you guys say goodbye to people when they are not engaged.
Oh, we do.
Or like just this idea of kind of people moving through
reckoning.
their phases.
The reckoning.
Yeah, why is that?
It's a reminder I have on my calendar, and it comes twice a year, and it says biannual membership purge.
Okay.
And it's a time where we kind of give a little gentle email nudge, which it's one of the few times that we break the sanctity of the Slack space, other than like meeting up in person and stuff. But we send an email to anyone who hasn't really engaged in like the last 3 months or hasn't said anything. We're like, hey, if you don't want to be part of the space, totally cool. We're all super busy individuals and have varying priorities, but we need you to either like engage and like say something, maybe share a link. We give them a few points of entry. We're like, hey, there's an event coming up. Here's a few things. But if not, we're going to deactivate your account in like 2 weeks. And then all of a sudden, a bunch of people come into the space and share all sorts of cool links and stuff. And a lot of those then peter. I'd say like half of those then peter off. And eventually the second time that they receive that email, they're like, it's okay. It's fine. I'm ready to let go.
I'm ready to say goodbye.
Right. They're like, I'll make room for someone new. And I think we have about 450 people in that Slack group who, and I think that's active and inactive members. So there's probably around like 300 that are active at this moment in time.
So why do you do the purge?
Oh, so why do we do the purge? Well, for one, it's to make room for other people who would be more engaged. 2, I think there are a lot of lurkers, but those don't even count in the purge. We don't like send them emails, but like people who've kind of forgotten about it. And it's a good way to remind them that this space exists because we do get busy and we have other things. And maybe they have an opportunity they wanted to share. Maybe they're looking for talent. Maybe they themselves are looking and they've kind of fallen beneath the surface, trying to like keep up and trying to like figure out stuff in their own life, and to remind them that this resource exists for them should they want to engage with it. But if not, no hard feelings.
Yeah. I really liked how you said you invited people by telling them that you think that they have something interesting to contribute.
You're special.
No, I totally like it. Like, well, that word to contribute is really important. And at Instagram, we used to measure the activity of the site based on if you were actually posting photos. So Facebook was like, are you in here? Like, are you you could just lurk, right? But there's something different about actually like contributing something.
Yeah.
Bringing something to the table.
Yeah, and like that really will make or break like the quality of what people are sharing, and actually sharing will kind of make or break a space that's about sharing
Totally.
things.
Totally. And I mean, one of my favorite stories is this high schooler reached out to me via Twitter, and he was interested in applying. He lived in somewhere in the middle of the country, but didn't really have much of like a creative community, and he didn't really have like any sort of like creative mentors. And he had found me on Twitter, and he's like, I'm trying to apply to like Cooper Union, and I'm wondering if you could look at my portfolio. And I was like, actually, why don't I just throw you in this space with like the chief creative officer of like Dropbox and like a bunch of other creative individuals who have a little bit more experience.
Big shots.
These select individuals who had something to contribute. And watching this dude share his portfolio and then like meet all these people and have them give feedback in like this really lovely, gentle way, and like setting that kind like he's now at Cooper Union. Super awesome.
No
He comes to our
way.
events here. It's
awesome.
And that was like one of like the coolest things, to like take someone, put them in that space, and just know that with all the energy and everyone else who has like all this experience to offer, and be able to like help them out and give some feedback.
Lifting each other up.
Having opportunities to help as well, even if you are a quote unquote big shot, or you feel like you have things to share, you don't always have opportunities to help.
Yes.
I think that's like sometimes the value of a community is that you are provided with opportunities to support one another.
Yeah. And there's a lot of like learners in there. There's people who are picking up side projects or doing like a 100-day project and they're learning typography. And then we have Terry of Grilly Type in there who runs this wonderful type foundry, offering like feedback on letter spacing and kerning and all that good stuff that I know nothing about. But I believe that everyone has something to contribute. I think even if the most you're doing is like someone comes into that space and they're having a hard time applying for jobs and you're able to like just offer moral support or just tell them that you've also been there, or in the freelance channel when you're chasing down a payment and someone's like, same, just that solidarity and like having a space and feeling like you have that support system is really important.
Yep.
Carly, something jumps out at me after hearing you speak, which is that you get a lot of emails from people. Yeah. People want your help. People are reaching out. Why is that? I do not get so many emails. Yeah, why do you get so many emails?
I think I make myself pretty accessible via email. I definitely have my email address in a lot of different places. And a lot of the times people are coming to me, a lot of like job seekers, people, I think especially after Creative Mornings, that was like a time where I met creative individuals all over the world. And I knew all this information about, I was on the Talk Watch Squad, so I watched a lot of talks. I consumed a lot of digital design talk content. But I knew I had a lot of information about like different studios doing different types of work. And I also think coming out like things like Hundreds Under 100, like having that name was like saying something that I don't know a lot of people were saying, and I think that drew a lot of people to me.
I think you're an exciting leader. I'll say that. Like, I think that you, we've known each other for probably around 8-7 years or something. And I think in that time, I've watched you, like, I don't know, really realize Carly to, 100% and beyond. And I think you seem to put your authentic self out there. You seem to represent maybe something in the creative world that other folks are like, oh, she's really doing her thing. She doesn't have to look like X, Y, and Z design legend, big shot heroes. Sure. Like you are,
Burn your idols.
You're being yourself. You're doing the things that you're passionate about and kind of representing well. And I think that's like, it's exciting for me just to see you as a friend. And I can see folks looking at that and being like, hey, that's the type of person that if I was going to get feedback from, or if I wanted to be part of a community, like I would go to, I would go to her.
Well, thank you, Kevin. That's so sweet. Yeah, Kevin gave me one of my favorite compliments today was that I was becoming more Carly than ever before. I remember you told me that. I was like, yes, more Carly.
Hi, Carly.
More Carly. Carly monster. No, and I think putting out that freak flag in a lot of ways, and then other freaks are like, oh, help me. Yes. And like kind of like creating a space around that. But also, I share a lot of stuff on like Arena and on Twitter where I'll just be like, here's like 50 links around looking for design jobs. And I've been having this conversation a lot lately. And like, here you go. Putting that stuff out into the universe. And then it's crazy. Wild stuff comes back.
Yeah. Kevin always talks about liking to poke the world and then see what comes back. Yeah.
Nothing better.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you about these events that you're hosting. So you start this digital group and people are showing up. Some of them are your friends. Some of them are young high school students in the middle of the country who now live in New York. How did you decide that you wanted to put people in the same room or start hosting events, and tell me about those events?
I think like anything, there's like that pendulum swing. It was like coming off of Creative Mornings, so many like monthly in-person events for hundreds of people. And I was like, yes, the internet's the future. I'm a technocrat. Let's get everyone into the Slack group. This is going to be perfect. And then I'm like, holy moly. These people need to know that they're real people behind these avatars and like get them back into a physical space. And then like creating a space for people to share. I know stories gets a little overwrought, but like stories, like people to share their story. And a lot of the times, I know when I began doing public speaking, people would always be like, well, where have you spoken previously? Like no one really wants to very few people, I should say, want to take that risk on like a new speaker, and creating a space where you could just come and stand up in front of a group of people. It's not recorded, 6 minutes or less, 6 people share something that they care a lot about. We've had people talk about, it was a designer talking about drawing the dishes in her sink when she was in this like creative lull, helped get herself out of it, as well as to do the dishes. developer who started a development studio called Sanctuary Computer here in New York talked about traveling across Canada, sleeping in buses, and trying to figure out what he wanted to do with his life. But people share stories that really run the gamut. And giving them that platform to do that is awesome. And then also just getting everyone into the physical space where they can like look each other in the eye, remind themselves they exist, and then like have that. There's something about just in person. Yeah, it's just good.
A little more texture.
A little more texture there.
Yeah.
And you can have a conversation that doesn't have to be in a thread, and you can do things in real time and not respond to them 2 days later. Yeah. There's a lot of benefits to that in-person communication.
I want to ask you too about where is this thing going? Which I know is a hard question, but I read somewhere that you said, like everything on the internet, this will live for 3 years. Yeah. I think it's been more than 3 years. You're like, this only has like a 3-year life cycle. Nice. Communities should only live for 3 years online. But I think we're past 3 years. Yeah, like what's your vibe about this?
Someone once told me like the worst thing you can do is like try to like keep things going after they're not going anymore. And in this situation, I thought that would be what I would run into 3 years later. Like, oh, everyone share a link. Like, where'd everyone go? And just like come into like the empty Slack channels. And it's like a ghost town. But that has not happened yet, which leads me to believe that I do think like it needs to change radically in some way. I think most things do to continue to evolve to meet the needs and the interests of the people that are in the space and to continue to grow in the ways that everyone would like it to. I think part of that is me stepping back. And the in-person events, I think, are fantastic. But I would love to see it span or grow into like more like mentorship opportunities and continue to be a little bit more focused in terms of getting back to that initial mission and figuring out what are the tangible ways we can be creating change and be creating resources for the creative community that enables them to do the things they want to do.
Yeah. How come mentorship? Is that sort of is that the core, deepest value that you're seeing the space create, or is that just something you're passionate about?
I think, and mentorship, I think a lot of people are looking for mentors. I don't know. I think that is like a farce. I think and that's a whole other podcast. But
Part 2.
I think I'm a big believer in like, I don't know, mentorship through like peer mentorship, like finding like-minded individuals and people who have varying levels of experience and like getting insights and feedback from them. That's like where all my good feedback comes from and all the good advice I've ever been given. And so more like around like peer mentorship and thinking about how individuals can help each other.
What value has this thing brought to your life? Are there any moments that stand out or people that stand out? Yeah, what has it done to you as like someone who just started a Slack group haphazardly and now here we are?
I've met a lot of really wonderful people, which I think is true when you talk to a lot of people who run communities and they get to meet the individuals within them. I think similar to what Kevin hit upon, like by putting myself in a place where like a high visibility spot within that community, even it's brought a lot of people to me in a way where like people have come out of the woodwork who share similar interests and passions and motivations that I have, as well as just like being someone who's able to connect other people to opportunities comes with its own set of rewards. And I recently shut down my studio. And as I look to figure out what I'm doing next, it's been a great resource for that as well. Like figuring out like having that group of people who know every little nook and cranny within the design industry and figuring out like what might be the cranny that I then want to occupy. They've been great for that too. But beyond that, I think only time will tell. I don't know. Someone asked me recently, actually regarding the studio, they're like, what's your legacy? Like, what's...
Whoa, how old are you?
27.
Oh so, my God. Cool it. Cool it. You got time.
That was kind of my response to it. I was like,
That's going to be my like cocktail party opener from now on.
Yeah,
like,
what's your legacy?
What's your name? I'm Kevin.
If you were Mandy Moore and you were 27, I'd be like, this is a meaningful question given your peak era. No offense, Mandy Moore, you're fine, but you know.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a, you're like, my life is like right in front of my face right now. Like, I have no idea. Like, I need to zoom out a little bit and look back at it and be like, oh yeah, like, it's interesting to go to like conferences and meet people and they're like, oh, I'm in the 100 Slack and I found my last like 2 roommates through it and I got my new job. And you're like, oh, like, that's cool. It's cool to like see and like meet that person for the first time in that moment and like know that there are ripples that happen from that. But as far as anything else, I have absolutely no idea.
I mean, thanks for doing what you do, because I believe when you say ripples, I think about even you just take that mentorship piece and that peer mentorship piece. You're providing a space for a number of people to experience what it's like to be part of a community that supports one another through highs and lows, and does it in a safe way.
Yeah.
And those folks, whether or not Hundos exists 3 more years from now, will have had that experience, and I think are more likely to flex that muscle to help others in that sort of way. And I personally think that's rad.
Aw.
There's your legacy.
That's my legacy. Well, I don't know. In the same way that when we shut down the studio, we released our drive file with all our Google Docs for how we ran the studio.
Oh.
I went into that yesterday when I was reading about you.
It's a messy little spot, but I don't know.
There's a giant legal disclaimer at the bottom that's the siren emoji, and it's
that will
legal
never
disclaimer.
protect us.
Yeah.
But, it's showing people the nuts and bolts behind it of just this thing is just run on a bunch of shoddy Google documents and a Slack group, and I can and you can too, but maybe you shouldn't because it's a lot of work.
Thanks for coming.
Thanks for coming on the show.
Yeah.
High fives.
Oh yeah.
High fives.
Oh yeah.
High fives.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, all the nuts and bolts, showing them all. If you want to know anything about Carly, everything will be divulged at some point.
It'll all be in a Google Doc.
Yeah, we can put this transcript up in a Google Doc if you want to, and people can jump in.
I have a bunch of essays in Google Docs that I was thinking about throwing up, but someday.
Yeah.
Only so many hours in the day.
Yeah. If you want to get to know Carly, I recommend following her on Twitter at Carly, CARLY, Ayres, AYRES. Carly Ayres, at Carly Ayres, no spaces, no underscores. Or you can also scope out her unique AF website, carlyayres.com. Seriously, check it out.
Carl Ayres. I wonder if anyone has said that. You can
Carla,
find her at Carl Ayres on Twitter or carlyayres.com. You're welcome.
If that makes it really easier for you. It was a gift, Kevin.
Okay, so you can also find out more about us, our company, People and Company, at peopleand.company. Not .com, but .company.
.company.
We're also writing a handbook. It's a book, It's called Get Together. It'll be published later this year. It's about how to build a community with your people, not for your people.
Mm-hmm.
And it's based on what we learned from conversations like this one you've heard today, as well as lots of time spent in communities, researching them, hanging out with them, helping them, coaching them.
Time spent.
Running with them.
Yeah.
Swimming with them.
The golden era, the golden days.
Hanging out with them on Saturdays, Sundays, Mondays. Okay.
Yeah. All the memories flooding through your brain right now.
Yes. You can also say hi to us. Send us an email, hi@peopleand.company.
Cool. Last thing. If you guys like this podcast and you listened all the way through and you feel like being generous to us, we hear that these reviews and subscriptions matter and help your podcast out. So if you want to subscribe if you haven't yet, or if you want to just click the number of stars that you think we deserve, we'd appreciate it.
Yeah.
Cool. Thanks, Carly. Thanks, guys. See you next time.
Bye.